So let me call this special meeting of the Board of Education, Fairfield Board of Education, to order on Wednesday, May 25th at 8:05 p.m. Present is Mrs. Eileen Lou McCormick, Mr. Mark Patton, Ms. Donna Carnell. We expect Mrs. Jessica Gerber here later. She's at a parent event at the moment. Myself, Philip Dwyer, Mr. Anthony Calabrese, Ms. Tricia Pitko, Mrs. Jennifer Maxon Kennelly, and Mr. John Llewellyn. If I could ask you to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance with the flag over here. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. This is a special meeting primarily to receive the report of HYA on the results of their surveys, their focus groups, and their individual meetings. And so we'll have them go through a presentation. Normally we would do public comment at the beginning of the meeting, but we thought it was appropriate for you to hear the report, and then if any members of the public wish to speak, we'll have the same rules that we normally do. Speak for 3 minutes. It won't be a Q&A thing. It'll be just any presentation you wish to make to the board. We do have 2 personnel matters that we wish to address, so after the presentation and public comment, after the presentation, questions from the board, and then public comment, we'll go into executive session. If there's nobody here, then we'll hold it in this room, but if there are people here who wish to stay for the action that is anticipated, the board will retire to the library and then come out after the what I hope to be a short executive session, but we can never guarantee based on the conversation we have. So with that, I would invite Dr. Drager and Dr. Fenning to give us a presentation. I would suggest that board members, at least the ones up at the front, retire to the front row so that we can see the presentation.
We were just discussing which group to face. Now you made it easy for us. Oh, you're just spreading out to the sides? Or are you going out there?
Well, I'm going to go out the front.
But you guys are going to stay there.
Where do you want us to go? We can go out to the front.
That's all right.
Yeah, that'll confuse you. Face out.
Face out. All right. We're going to face out.
The majority of people are.
Well, thank you for having us back. We're pleased to be here tonight. And we were here for 2 full days in May doing focus groups. We actually had 31 individual meetings. And I've got to stop right now and thank Dr. Tuttle for being accommodating with the staff, but there's a person sitting over there that needs a big, huge thank you from us, because we've been in many districts and it never works as well as it worked in Fairfield. Margaret Brown, you did a great job. You continue to support us and we really appreciate it. But seriously, now, I bet you think I say that in every presentation. I don't. I really don't. So this is very special that you made this very meaningful for us. And I think it helped us with our context. This first slide, of course, is agenda. Why don't you move it, because I can't find something out right now. So here's here's who we met with. Board, 9 individual interviews with the board members, and then individual interviews, mostly like the police chief and stuff like that with the town public officials. The first column on the left here is the ones we met with individually. This is where the 31 meetings were all. Administrators, I had groups of principals, assistant principals, and stuff like that. Community members and parents, we combined, because many times the parent was also a community member, or a community member had been a parent, or was a grandparent, or had a niece. So to try and distinguish which was which, we just grouped them all together, that we talked to 40 community members and parents, a lot of overlap there. Very interesting, we talked to 30 students in different schools, actually the 2 high schools and the alternative high school. Very fascinating, great groups of kids in each of the schools, very unique perspectives. We always enjoy that. 4 support staff members and 44 teachers. They actually came in mass. We had 2 meetings. One meeting was very lightly attended, if attended at all, and then the second meeting was like 44 teachers coming in all at one point, but we had a good discussion there. Total 161 people with face-to-face contact with Dwight and I, but even more importantly, I'm going to go into more detail later in the report. You see the online survey. This is an outstanding representation of the Fairfield community too. We rarely see numbers this big, especially from your size community. 32 administrators, 227 community members, 863 parents. I'll have you some percentage breakdowns. And actually, Dr. Fenning, Dwight, and I, we tried to say, well, maybe you shouldn't do a student category because they don't, well, guess what? You blew us away with that. That's the most students we've ever seen on a student survey, online survey, and they were very thoughtful in their comments, so 59 of those. Support staff 55, and good representation of your teachers at 268. Grand total of 1504. That's a lot of people. So we have them grouped in our minds of the teacher said this, the board said this, the town people said this, the community member said this, the parents said this. But what Dwight's about to go through right now is what we saw as overarching characteristics across all groups. We're going to show you the characteristics that we feel are the strengths of Fairfield. We're going to show you the challenges that you face in the next 3 to 5 years, and then the desired characteristics of the new superintendent. And then I'm going to come back on and do the online survey and show you how that turned out in terms of those results. So, Dr. Fenning, you're on. Oh, by the way, important note, they're in alphabetical order. There's not a priority. The first one you see is not the most important. It's like A or B.
I'm going to make sure I stay by the mic because I understand it has to be for the video piece. When we spoke to all the groups, obviously we find a lot of commonalities, and we try to say, and we take, the number we give the board on the full report is a lot of comments, probably 50 pages, maybe a little bit more of comments altogether. And then we say, what are the ones that are most frequently mentioned among all of the groups, and they're not divided by the groups themselves. And we talk again about the strengths of the district. This is a district that's very proud of their accomplishments in the past, but also very proud of the programs that are in place now. So when you talk about the strengths, you look at the academic curriculum that presents high expectations for students. And I'm not going to read every single one of them, but what I think are even the highlights of the highlights. And that was one that was there very often. You also have I think it's a unique community, only because we've worked in a lot of communities in the most recent past where you don't see often a kind of a united front on the value of education and what it can bring for its students. Sometimes it's more disparate in the way people view that. Obviously, there are things that people would like to see addressed, and there are challenges that the district would face. But overall, the value of what's offered here, and the reason that a lot of people either have stayed in Fairfield or moved to Fairfield or will choose to move to Fairfield or are thinking about it, see the educational system as something that's very strong. There was a lot of discussion about special education, and on the strength side that there was a commitment to special education programs to meet the needs of students. You'll see some things that will come up that I'll mention about concerns and how to maintain those kinds of things in the future and even make the programs a little more of a variety and address curriculum in certain ways. But as a strength, the program is seen as a strength. And again, committed parents. Aside from the school district, the community itself is kind of known for the volunteerism that's out there, for parent involvement. And I think there were 1 or 2 people that said, you know, it's not just somebody that's there every time for every event, but a lot of people in a lot of different settings who give their time when they can. There are those who are consistent givers of their time, but when something or some help is needed on a personal level, that people come out and do help the schools and the community as a whole. So it wasn't just the school district they were speaking to. The encouragement to implement best practices and successful current educational trends. This often brings up a dichotomy of thought too, because you get into what is a successful trend, how is it researched, how do people value that, how do they test it, when do educators or administrators decide to put programs into place that reflect these trends. And of course you get into all the issues about testing and curriculum and not being a district that's just out there to have a program to be the guinea pig for the program, but something that's proven and is based on best practices. But as a strength, it's one that many people mentioned as, you know, we're not afraid to look at the trends, but the ones that have been proven somewhere and we have examples for. Oftentimes, the location and the access to higher education in the community. We've heard a lot about, and we're sorry we didn't spend more days here, a lot about all the great restaurants in Fairfield. We didn't get to do all of them. We did a sampling. And over 2 days, that's not much of a sampling because we didn't have a lot of time to do that. Did that slide flip? Okay. The sense of community we already talked about. One of the things that's on there too, students coming back come back to Fairfield to raise their families. In a number of the groups, I wasn't surprised, but probably more, on occasion in districts, you'll have people who will come back to work here or come back to raise their families here. And yet, there seemed to be more people who did that in Fairfield, who saw it as a community to stay in, and maybe had gone for a period of time and came back, or had taken a job somewhere and decided to take a job nearer or back close to Fairfield, so that they could raise their children here and also have them take part in what goes on in the school district and the community as a whole. The town and community support for financial resources for the schools. Financial resources for the schools is a huge topic. We can talk about, tax burdens, and we'll talk about some of the concerns with the dollars that are spent on education, how they're valued, what kind of person it takes to lead a district like that, where does the money go, tracking it. But there has been a strong financial backing for the district within Fairfield. Some of the challenges and concerns, and again, when the full report goes online, you'll see a lot more of these. Again, this is just kind of a summation of the ones we found to be most frequent. The achievement data, the provision of data and information to parents. So when I look about achievement data provided to parents should be consistent, available, and user-friendly. We had a lot of comments about how does that come out to the public? How do I find that out? And while there are some great comments about communication in the district, there are also some great concerns about it being consistent. And for instance, as I approached many people in the audiences, some people who may not be parents in the district, some people who may not participate on a daily basis in a district, is there a way where they can consistently get information, or how do they find that out? So the concern is, while there's a lot of good data out there, how does it get to me, or how am I going to be able to get to it? And that probably covers the third one down too, avoiding the hit or miss approach of reaching parents with student information. Again, some people commented that communication is great, and it depends on how often they went to a web page or if they knew about it, and others thought that, we need to know if it's going to be consistent out there so we can find the kind of information we need to know, not only about the things that are going on in school, but the schools are often the venue for which the town communicates some issues to parents. The challenges of hiring a new superintendent, I have to mention that because I think that's a challenge no matter where we go. It's a challenge we accept, and it's one that we think can be met here. Even after we've gone through all of this information that we've seen, people say, well, who would want to come to Fairfield? And we can answer that. There are a lot of people that want to come to Fairfield as a professional and assist the district in going forward. Effectively dealing with federal, state, and local budget constraints. There are a lot of messages going out, not only from your state, but on a federal level, and even on a local level, that are concerned with budgeting for the long term. Well, we can talk about debt and debt service over a long time. We can talk about how school districts are going to have to handle that. And people are concerned that how does a new superintendent come in and meet that challenge? From what we've heard, and there are a lot of comments about the positive nature of a superintendent who is extremely familiar with the workings of the budget and extremely familiar with how those dollars are spent, not just in a presentation on an annual basis, but day to day and watching how things go and being accountable for it. So when we look at candidates for this position, it would probably be safe for us to say that someone who has some financial background and can deal effectively with the school budget, and also how it's developed, how it's presented to the town, how that person reacts with the town, and also the vast constituency of the town, to make sure that while you're meeting the educational program, the budget can be something that's explained well and met well. And there are more and more limitations being put on that budget on a federal, state, and local level. I mentioned maintaining excellent working relationships with the selectmen, RTM, and the Board of Finance, because right now I think the view that we had garnered from a number of people was that communication seems to be there on budget items. The budget's detailed enough for that group. There were some other people, maybe on a community basis, who said, we wish we knew as much as they did, and maybe have it explained as thoroughly. Even though it may have been explained thoroughly at a meeting, they may have missed a meeting, or you don't pick up maybe the nuances when you watch a budget presentation on a television program that relates to the meeting, or on the documents that may have been presented to the public and are available for public look. There was concern mentioned by a lot of people for structuring a program that meets the needs of the increasing ELL population. And I think that's important to note because that did come up a number of times. And not just from a standpoint of isolating one group, but saying, how are we going to make sure that we're meeting the needs of all the students? And making sure that, when we deal with issues of curriculum and even budgeting and resources, that we allocate the proper amounts in the right places so that all of the students are getting the benefit of what is contributed by the town of Fairfield to the educational program. Welcoming community and staff input on decision making. It's kind of interesting, and I think Brad will bring up a couple of things when we see the statistics on the survey. Some people who took the survey by group may think that communication is fine. And other people, again, and I think I mentioned that earlier, think that communication could be better. So I think getting that input and making sure that all groups are covered, or as many as possible, has to be something the new superintendent will have to pay attention to, close attention to. Because there is a feeling by some it's not strong enough, again, and there are a feeling by some that they do have it. And that may be something as simple as the people who are involved with the schools and the people who are not, or something as complicated as how do you make a sound communication problem that can reach all of the venues all of the time. I would tell you this. I forget how long Brad was a superintendent. How many years? 8 years. And I was a superintendent for about 20 years. And no matter what form of communication we had, and sometimes we had communication people who dealt with it very directly on a daily basis, and sometimes it was the superintendent's office, and sometimes it was a combination of both. No matter how well you do it, there's always a need to do more. And I think that's important, or staying cognizant of how it's being done to be consistent. So that's important. Working effectively within a difficult political climate, and that doesn't mean necessarily locally, but understanding what the political climate is. When we come to do a search, I was a New Jersey superintendent, a Pennsylvania superintendent. I worked in the Department of Education in New Jersey. I had to learn what is the political climate like locally, how does the government work in Fairfield, how does it work in a Connecticut basis, and candidates will be looking at that. And of course, when people say, we want to do a national search, which we do, there will be some people who come from out of state that will have to learn that climate as well. So understanding that and making sure that there is some provision of time for people, if they come from out of state, to be the new superintendent, to learn what that process is, but also making sure they do understand it. When you talk about the state level, I think it's very important for a superintendent to be active in what the issues are that not only affect Fairfield, but maybe the entire state, and be a spokesperson for that. If you look at a lot of the local superintendents, including your own, they spend a significant amount of time, depending on the season and the legislative calendar, in dealing with some of those issues. So that's, the new superintendent will also have to see that as a concern and something that needs to continue. And working with challenging and changing board issues and diverse board opinions. No board of education is of one opinion. None. None I've ever worked with. So when you sit with a board, you have to understand what consensus is going to mean, and not just as a concept, but as a term that applies to specific events and things that have to get done within the district. And then making sure you're providing all the information among the board members to make that work. People who apply for this job will be watching TV. They'll not only see this, which is a very minor part of what they'll find out about Fairfield, but they'll be watching the board meetings, and they'll be watching anything that may be up on YouTube or is available via video about the town of Fairfield, and then, of course, anything on the internet now, because we are at a pretty good age for finding out information. And they'll take a look at that, and they will say, all right, if we have people that have varying opinions, how am I, as a superintendent, going to work with the board to establish how that working relationship will be in the future? You want me to continue? Okay. I'm doing a great job. Great. My greatest critic. I like having them. All right. The desired characteristics for a superintendent. You may say, well, gee, they should all be the same. We want somebody who can do the job, but then it breaks down into some finite things. A listener who's intelligent, respectful, and respected by all stakeholders. The respect item is very high. And one of the hardest things for a superintendent to gain being new is the respect of all constituencies. And that's a matter of getting out there and making sure that you're interfacing with those constituencies and making sure that they understand not only where you've been, but what you've done, but what are your plans for Fairfield? You know, Fairfield has a great plan for going forward, but if it sits on the shelf, it won't do anybody much good, and if nobody knows about it, it won't do any much good either. So I think it's going to be something that the superintendent has to take time to do. And one that came up a lot was collaboratively building a team rather than building agendas. This is about building a team of people that work together rather than one person's singular agenda. I think, you know, one of the things that we're seeing more and more in superintendencies as they are open and we try to fill them, and I can remember even back in one of my superintendencies, somebody said, what are you going to do to make your mark in this district? Well, you know, making my mark wasn't what was important. Making a mark for the district is what's important. And I think that's what we're seeing more and more of, superintendent candidates who understand that. This isn't about an individual agenda. Everybody in this room probably knows of a setting, an educational setting, public educational setting, where superintendent came in and had a very set agenda and wasn't very flexible, and they're not successful. So you've got to build a team, you've got to not only get board support, community support, but make sure the team is working together and not have it be an individual agenda. Being able to stand your ground. I'm mentioning that because developing ideas, while you have that agenda, and it is that team approach, there will always be opposition to almost anything that might be proposed that's new. We know that. We know that from the discourse that goes on not only in the community, but that goes on nationwide. And I think that's important to recognize that. But there is a point where you say, all right, we've gathered all the information we can gather, and this is the direction we're going to take. So one of the desired characteristics is having someone who knows what that point is and when that point occurs, and saying, all right, we've got the input, this is the way we need to go forward. But I also have to caution and say, and that's where that agenda comes in. When you go forward, it can't be the individual agenda, but one that has, in that case, maybe the majority or a consensus of feeling among the community constituencies or the people with whom are going to be affected by a program or a change. Developing relationships within all political spectrums. You know, in the superintendencies of the 21st century, to believe that you operate outside of any political influence is rather foolish venture. So right now, that doesn't mean you're a politician, but it means you have to understand what the political agencies are doing, and you have to be able to walk among them to get the work done. And it's not about individuals again, it's about making sure that the school district moves forward. And obviously engaging with the teachers in the schools. You know, depending on the school and depending on the people with whom we speak, you will hear about different levels of engagement with the schools. Is the superintendent visible? Is it someone who comes in the schools? Is it someone that we can talk to? Is it someone that we know? When we talk to the students, you know, we heard varying opinions on that, whether they knew the superintendent or they didn't, whether they had engaged in a conversation with the superintendent, whether that superintendent they had seen at different events, and we had a large scale of answers on that. But one of the desired characteristics for sure is that that person be visible and seen, not just at events, but also in classrooms and seeing what's going on within the school district. I talked a little bit about experience and proactive in Hartford by way of talking about politics a little bit, and I think that's important. Experience in managing large capital budgets. You know, when you have a district that's in need or has a plan to move forward with a capital budget, there are a lot of things you have to think about. What are the resources available? What's going to be the equity of a capital program that works for all of the schools? Do we need to build, add on, change, look at what we've done already, and take some stock of that and see if changes have to be made in what we've already done? And that's important. A teaching background. And that just didn't come from teachers. That came from a number of groups. If you haven't been in the trenches, you don't know what to do. And I think that's important, but teaching can happen on all levels. You know, most likely, superintendent candidates who are teachers, and the majority of them are, may have only taught at one level. So that in and of itself is fine, but then they have to also find some way that allows them to have had experience in working with other levels, and who do they call upon to make sure they understand all of the levels of education that go on in terms of teaching. And I think a couple of those have been covered in other things that I've said. Okay, it's your turn? All right, I'm sorry. You said I was done.
I want want to highlight a couple points on on the 6 slides that he just went through. By the way, people at home and people in the audience, if you're worried that PowerPoint will cause amnesia or anything, we only have 5 or 4 more slides, so we're on a good pace here to finish. There's not 30 more slides. I frequently go into communities and they say the parents are engaged. This is one of the few places where I was actually given a metric that showed how engaged the parents are. There was a point up on one of those slides that said 30% of all Connecticut PTA membership is in Fairfield. That's an unbelievable statistic, and that does speak to a very engaged community. Are we not being caught? Oh, you're blocking it. I got it. I got it. No, I got it. I thought we were doing something else wrong. But that is an incredible statistic, and as I said, few communities can ever say that. I think you should be very proud of that. The other thing I got to say from all those slides that are up there is Dr. Title was, again, many times brought out for incredible praise by administrators, by parents, by community members, by police chief, fire chief, town people. I mean, his leadership here has definitely created a nice set of educational values that are well in place, and people seem to really appreciate that. Now, in our written comments, the ones that come in over the online survey, there's detractors. Look, 20 years, he has a lot of people writing bad things about him. I have things written bad about me. That's the life of a superintendent. But I have to say, overwhelmingly, Dr. Title's tenure here has been seen as an overwhelming success and has left you in very good stead. And I wanted to make sure he received that recognition from our meetings with the 31 groups, because that came across loud and clear. So let me go into the electronic survey, which is up here. Now, how many people are in the audience tonight? Maybe 25 to 30, somewhere close to that. Well, up here we have 1,504. So this is one of those times that the board really gets to hear from everybody. We had only 2% come from the administrative ranks, community members 15%, but look at that, parents represent over 60, almost close to 60% of these answers. Again, students overwhelmed us, we had almost 4%, support staff 3.7%, and teachers came in around 18%. So what did they say? Oh, you're so fast. Now, I'll orient you to this slide just a little bit. The first column after the description is the national benchmark. This survey has been given many times in many different districts across the United States, probably 30 to 50,000 response over those years of giving the survey. So you see where most people fall. Interestingly enough, if you start to look at all in Fairfield, which is the next column, notice it's 45, 40 on the national benchmark, 45, 40, 39, 33, 35, 30. You're almost in the order that the national benchmark comes out. In other words, if you took the whole nation, and I don't see this, this is the first time I've actually seen this where a district kind of lines up with the national benchmark, and you really kind of do. The only one I'm going to point out that's interesting, see number 2, foster a positive professional climate of mutual trust and respect. I don't know if you can read that, but it's up there on the second one. Well, the national benchmark's 40%. Everybody in Fairfield aggregated together was 46%, but teachers came in at 81%. This, by far, is one of the highest percentages I've ever seen teachers say. And when I met with the teachers, this was very important to them. They want to be involved in the decision-making process. They feel too much comes down to them and is told to them and not followed up on. So they really want to engage in the decision-making, strategic planning process of this district. And it showed up in that survey. The other thing I'll show you is there's 5 key areas of this leadership profile, and they're done by the colors. And trust me, these colors are so muted, I can't really describe which one they are. The management is that one at the top, which is, I don't know, he's going to say purple. Then we have communication and collaboration, which is kind of green. And I can't wait to see what he calls this next one. Community engagement in the middle, what's the color? Orange? Okay, orange. And then we have instructional leadership, I'm going to say blue. And then we have vision and values. Now, in some districts, I'll get all blues at the top, or I'll get all oranges at the top. What you have in Fairfield is a great mix. It really is, you're hitting them all in the first 5, and then it starts to repeat itself, hitting them all in the next 5. You can look at the national norms and where the specific groups go. Let's go to the second page. Oh, so quick. Take a look at the last, I always like to look at the last one. So, nationwide, utilizing student achievement data is the lowest, but it's even lower in Fairfield. And what that tells me is you're probably already using student data to drive achievement, and it's not seen as a high priority. Look at 24. Develop strong relationships with constituents, local government, area business. Again, this is a strength in Fairfield. Only 13% overall said that, while nationally it's 22%. But because the relationship with the BOF, RTM, and town selectmen has been so good, especially on the budget issues, I think that's one reason that's coming in so low. District's mission, vision, and core beliefs, very high on the national survey, quite low here, and an effective manager of the day-to-day operations, kind of equal with the national perspective on that. And then you can go through and see where the different groups vary. I thought the teacher one was the one that stood out the most. It's vastly different, really very different, and very, very an important part of their thing. So now we're just going to go into the last part, which is the desired characteristics. It kind of becomes our ad. It's the words that make up our ad. And Dwight, do you have anything to say on the electronic survey that I didn't?
No, I'm fine.
Okay. So then we have these Fairfield Public Schools. So after we've done all this survey analysis, humility and resilience in the face of dealing with difficult decisions and varying opinionated personalities. And, you know, Dwight said it best. This happens in all communities, but I think it is extremely important in Fairfield. This is a very high expectation community with very strong opinions and some difficult decisions. You know, we had racial disparity up there, and I'm not going to repeat what you know. Along your eastern border, you have some issues with racial disparity in one school and possibly in a second school. Not easy problems to solve, and yet that's the way the housing and socioeconomic flow has gone, and it's an issue that the board faces, the community faces, and the new superintendent faces. Those are tough decisions, and those are tough discussions. Accessibility, too, for community groups, very important. You cannot be a closed-door superintendent here. You're going to have to be engaged with the community. This is not where, you know, decisions come out of a closed office. This has to be an engaged superintendent. Excellent financial acumen, no doubt about it. Dr. Title gets incredible praise for the detail for which he knew the budget, for the transparency, and especially for the believability. Some superintendents can give a budget presentation and nobody believes them. Everybody thinks they're hiding money, they've got money in pillows and under mattresses. I didn't get any of that feedback here at all. There's still people who feel schools spend too much. I did hear that, you know, just so you know. Teaching and administrative experience that serves the foundation. Sometimes we hear we need a businessman. Sometimes we hear we need somebody who's not in education. Overwhelmingly, we heard you want teaching and administrative experience and increasing responsibility. Adaptability and developing professional presence that's demonstrated through that visibility. Again, not just at football games, not just at plays, but in schools, in classrooms, meeting with parents in the evening. And finally, desired characteristics. These kind of speak for themselves. Clear and effective means of defining Fairfield's diversity through previous evidence. That's a long sentence. To demonstrate community engagement. In other words, they've already done that, and we can see that, and they have transparency built up on trust, honesty, and integrity. Budget we have in there again because that is so important here. Curriculum, obviously we want a balanced program for all students. One of the things I need to tell you from the alternative high school, and I actually heard it in your regular high school from the students, is there's way too much pressure on college prep right now. The students are feeling it, and they feel there's not enough alternative programs or not enough okayness to not be in college prep. They'd like some career tech programs more so than there are, and they would appreciate that and take some of the pressure off the college prep. And I think that's what we're talking about in this wide curriculum and programs for everybody. Demonstrate district-wide achievement results. In other words, you want somebody who creates higher expectations of achievement and actually achieves them. Creative in the development of educational working environment, well-managed, fairly evaluated, inclusive. That's about staff. Human resource skills, again about staff. Decreased turnover. And of course, project development, project monitoring. In other words, is what we're doing effective? Should we be doing it anymore? Is there any reason not to be doing what we're doing? So we are now, of course, in the advertising stage, the recruitment stage. Our applicant pool is starting to fill out. Dwight and I have a long list of people to call for recruitment, people who don't know they want the Fairfield job, but we want to tap them on the shoulder, both in the Northeast area and across the nation. We need about the next 4 to 5 weeks to get this all together and bring you a great slate of candidates. And Dwight, is there anything that we need to say other than...
The only thing I would add is, key for me was the word demonstrate that's up there when we talk about the desired characteristics and you know, because it's easy to say you've done something, but we want people to demonstrate that to us. And there will be no candidate who can demonstrate all those things. So we're not going to be foolish about that. But by the same token, there should be candidates who can demonstrate a great many of them. And if not being able to demonstrate something specific, that they know how to work on that and get a team together to do that.
Some questions from the board.
Yeah, just, I would add that an executive summary in narrative form, once approved by the board, will be the piece that's online, along with the charts that we presented, and then the board has, as an appendix, all of the individual comments. So thank you very much.
Now are we out of your field?
Now, we're done with the PowerPoint, so it's above both of ours' head, but you might want to get the light off.
Please and thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Again, to remind the audience, as well as the TV audience, we do have some time before any resumes will be seen. The board has not seen any resumes yet and won't for about a month, give or take. The PowerPoint will be put on the board website tomorrow morning, and then once the report is finished and not in draft form, that report will also be put on the website. That might take another couple of days. So having said that, do board members have questions they wish to address to our two consultants? Mrs. Lou McCormick.
First, I want to thank you for this presentation. That was really great. I really enjoyed the detail that you provided, and it kind of was very encompassing, so it covered a lot of different people's perspectives, which I think is refreshing for everyone to be able to see it in such a objective way. This is just out of curiosity, and I don't know if we talked about this fully before, but I'm curious to hear, I don't know if you can share this, what some of the student feedback was, because we rarely interview the students on these type of like hiring decisions, but you know, what were some of the highlights that they had mentioned?
I'll mention a couple, and then maybe Brad can chime in. I think, you know, they have a great concern about the educational program. When boards make decisions that are usually aligned with budget, and maybe some programs are reduced, or a particular class that a student had taken is no longer offered because they were high school students, they have concerns about that. So they're often worried when they hear budget, because they don't know sometimes the inner workings of the budget on how those decisions are made, and maybe once in a while being asked to participate in that process. You know, what programs, and that doesn't mean they've never been given an opportunity. It means just, you know, that they have concerns about that. Brad mentioned one that I think is important, and I think that's, you know, that, you know, while we want all of our students to achieve to their utmost ability, there are some students saying that their utmost ability may not be college, and it may not be something that goes along those lines, but may involve some other career choice, and that, you know, they would appreciate someone who could look at those opportunities being offered for students. I don't know if you want to add some.
The students at the high school I went to were very appreciative of Fairfield. In fact, their number one complaint, and it's kind of funny, was field trips. They felt field trips had been either reduced or constricted because of budget concerns, and yet I didn't get that sense from teachers or administrators or anybody else, but the students felt that way. And finally, after about 20 minutes of field trip comments, I had to say, I can't solve this today. We need to move on to something else. And they all laughed about it because they realized they had worked themselves up into a frenzy about wanting to go into New York more often on field trips. But they were a fascinating group to talk to because they were very appreciative of the sports programs, the music programs, the drama programs, all the programs of their teachers. This is a great group of kids. Now, let me tell you about the alternative high school, because I see a lot of alternative high schools throughout the nation. You have one that works. You have a great leader, you have good faculty, but the 4 students I met with were fascinating. One wants to be an emergency room technician. The other one wants to be a cosmetology, you know what I mean. The other one wants to be a diesel mechanic, and in his entire life, I said, not gas, he goes diesel. I said, okay, we're going to go diesel. And he has known for a long time he wants to be a diesel mechanic. And the other one is going to major in psychology and was accepted into a university. And yet all 4 of them said, we don't fit in because that's not the expectation of Fairfield. And this was a poignant moment for me because I've seen these types of students. Now, for these students, it was working, but they all talked about the pressure of college. And I had some of the students in the regular high school talk to me about the pressure of college. So I think in high expectation communities, you always have to be cognizant that you can't just cater to the high achieving, push. In fact, the juniors, of course, and Dwight, I'm sure hears this across the nation too, Junior is the worst year because every kid loads their schedules with AP courses trying to make their best impression on colleges. And they all talked about the burden of homework, the burden of the work. And, you know, I always used to have to say in a high-achieving district, do you want your children to take more than a full college load during their junior year? Because we would have kids sign up for 6 and 7 AP courses, and that's more than you take in college. You take 15 credits in college, that's like 5 courses. So why is a kid, as a junior in high school, taking 6 and 7 AP courses? So I heard the same concerns here, but they were fascinating. And I would encourage the superintendent, the board, to find ways to engage with them because they were very open and transparent.
We had a couple of the regular snow day issues too, and cafeteria food. We kind of dismissed those rather quickly. There was an exceeding amount of praise, and Brad mentioned it, for their teachers. And not just their teachers in the classroom, but their teachers' involvement in their activities beyond the classroom. And also the support of the parent community, seeing different people in different locations at different times. So it was teachers, administrators, and parents who they genuinely appreciate seeing at all of these kinds of events and being involved in their school life.
Other questions, Mrs. Lou McCormick?
No.
Other questions from board members? Mrs. Maxon Kennelly.
In speaking with the administrators and teachers that you spoke with, I don't know if in the course of the focus groups or conversations they ever separated themselves by elementary versus secondary, but to whatever degree that they did you get a sense of different major focal points for the two, or is it kind of a merge in your impression?
The teachers all came in one group, although you could always tell who was talking by their issue. Not major issues. Again, that overall theme from teachers was we want to be more engaged and more appreciated in the decision-making process. That was, it didn't matter whether they're K or 12 or somewhere in between. In terms of the administrators, the elementary group was a very lively group, very strongly opinionated, but very appreciative of Dr. Title's leadership. They talked about how he would actually serve as a role model for them. And I think I see this in all districts. The secondary administrators are a little more cavalier. They just, you know, we can do this job with or without you. You know, I mean, they were very, very self-assured and very confident in their ability to lead. Very enthusiastic. In fact, the principal of the high school where I met with the students, he was so enthusiastic about just listening to the students. He loved everything they said, and usually I never have had a principal actually sit in for that session, and it was just wonderful that he did. So I was impressed that he cared enough to listen to his students that way.
And I had the same experience in high school.
And again, you should always speak into the microphone for the TV.
And I had the same experience in one of the high schools.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Patton.
In the section where you went through the challenges and concerns based on the people that you talked to, and there was a couple of pages of things that are highlighted, and then you went into what the ad would look like, or what it will look like to attract candidates. So my question is, how do you address, you know, this roughly 20 points of laundry lists of the challenges, concerns when you're screening candidates? Because obviously you can't put that all in an ad, and you know, you may not be able to get to every single one of these kinds of things in a pre-interview, that sort of thing.
The question I always ask in a screening interview is, have you read the leadership profile report? First question, or not the first question, but I'm going to fit that question in. My most beloved response is, no, I haven't had a chance to look at that yet. Really? You're serious about this job and you haven't had a chance to look at that? The second one is, what did you learn from it? And usually the candidate who's then they turn the interview on me, and they'll start to ask me about, like, to your point, they may have picked out 4 or 5 things on that list. And I'm always fascinated to listen to which ones they picked out and which ones they're focusing on as issues, because it tells me how in touch they are with a community. Have they faced that problem before? Sometimes they use one of your challenges as one they've solved and they want to give me an example of it. That's nice. Sometimes they say, how bad is that? You know, I mean, this looks bad on paper, but it is as bad as it could be. So I find that interaction with what they took away from that list, but you're right, we don't go down all 20. Because some of those, you will see some of those in every community, you know, and they know that's part of the superintendent land. Do you want to add anything?
No.
Because talking to the mic,
Well, no, just to reiterate, we use the leadership profile to guide us with that. We want our candidates to read that, so once you go through the final approval process, we share that with them right away. So they'll see the larger list that they wouldn't see in an ad.
So, no, actually, I find that fascinating because you're using the data that you collected and you're kind of using it to kind of pull information out of your candidate that they wouldn't necessarily volunteer in relation to what we are looking for.
Well, and I want to use Dwight's example. Every candidate we screen for you, we're going to really ask for demonstration of their financial skills, because that is so critical to success in Fairfield. If this is the first time I've ever seen a budget, I don't think that's going to be a good answer unless they really got some other great characteristics, because they're going to have some financial acumen to make a successful superintendency go here.
Okay, great, thank you.
Other members wish to ask a question? I have one. This is the most important decision this board will make. It's a more important decision than the annual budget. Virtually every decision pales in comparison to hiring the next superintendent, the CEO of this district. So, of course, we want to be well loved for the decision we make. If we wanted to say we hired somebody with an attribute and the teachers would say, you got it right, or you went to the parents and the parents said, that's exactly the attribute that we were looking for as a board, you got it right. What would be the one attribute for both teachers and or parents that you would say, maybe two different attributes that you would say, based on all of your conversation, the most important attribute for a superintendent from those two different groups?
I think that goes back to looking at the survey and what was listed as the #1 characteristic, and that deals with the communication aspect of the position, because communication is such a broad-based topic. And you're talking about data, talking about access, you're talking about being part of the mix in terms of making decisions, all of those things included. So that's going to have to be, I think, the #1 attribute. Right behind it, and maybe tied with it, is that financial acumen. But in terms of, and that would be 2, I guess, but, and Brad can add to that, but I think, everyone we spoke to is looking to be a participant in the process, and not just the folks who are involved in the school district now, but the people who we talk to who are out in the community who may not be so familiar with the operation of the district anymore. They may have had students here before. They may have participated before. So I think, for me, those were the 2 that I heard most resoundingly.
Yeah, and I'll amplify that. I used to work in human resources for a long time, and there's 3 major complaints across the entire globe on people's work culture. The room is too hot, the room is too cold, and there's not enough communication. Those are the 3 top things. It doesn't matter what company you work for. Temperature is the first 2, and then communication is the second one. And I'm going to give the new superintendent a tip that's going to, we do actually talk to the candidates and try and put them on a career to success here too. The teachers need engagement in some form. They need to have either a monthly meeting with the superintendent with representatives or something like that, because I think there used to be that in the past. It went away, and they just don't feel a strong connection to the central office in terms of the superintendent's engagement with them. So I think that would be a tip on this communication. To Dwight's point, the parents want to be engaged, the town officials want to be engaged, the police chief is absolutely in love with the communication with Dr. Title, as is the fire chief. None of that should diminish. So, it is going to be, for lack of a better term, you got to press the flesh a lot, and in many different ways. It's not just one way. You're just going to have to be an excellent communicator, and I think that's pretty expected in most high expectation communities, but I think it's even more important because of the, there's that book, Going from Good to Great. You're at good, if not halfway to great, and you're going to have to get somebody who can take you there and even take you higher. The other thing I think we heard is they don't want somebody coming in and rearranging the deck chairs right away. They do not want to change. Nobody wants a change agent to come in and tip over the tables and say, we're going to do it this way right now. I heard over and over again, we want the person to learn, look, listen, and yes, then make major decisions that'll take us higher. But don't throw out everything that we're doing right now just for change's sake. We gave you many more than you asked for.
No, that's fine.
We covered a broad swath of
Okay,
expectations.
thank you. Ms. Pitko.
I really wanted to thank the both of you for this presentation. I was raised here, and I chose to raise my daughter here, and I really think that you did a great job of giving a voice to everyone in our community. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Other questions from board members? If I see nobody raising their hand, then I will join for the whole board and say thank you. I will say I had one particular friend who is familiar with the search process and complimented the two of you by saying that you were the most professional team he had seen in doing this. And so I wanted to pass that on to you because we did get good responses from people relative to your visits with them.
That's good to hear.
So thank you.
Thank you. We'll stay for public comment.
Yes, please do. Okay, thank you. Now we are time for public comment, and the rules, of course, are the same. Just come forward in whatever order you do, and state your name and address, and up to 3 minutes. And who's first?
Jerry Kroglian, 246 Old Spring Road. You are the 6th firm that I've worked with over my educational career, and easily the most open and the best I've ever seen. I really appreciated your question on the questionnaire about naming potential candidates, because I'm really interested in recruitment rather than application. And I see that in terms of your demonstrating. Each segment began with the word demonstrate. I'm wondering how many people gave you feedback on that questionnaire, and if there was any grouping of people that named a particular town or a particular person. You don't have to go into specifics, but I'd just like to know how that aspect of the questionnaire worked for you.
Thank you for the comment. This is a public comment listening, not a dialogue, unfortunately, but they'll be staying until the end, and if you have an individual question, my guess is that they could respond within, depending on what the question is. Anybody else wish to come forward and state your name and address and make a comment? Please do.
Robert Benjamin, 240 Old Mill Road. I'm a member of the community. I teach at Fairfield Ludlow High School, and I had 3 daughters who went through the system. I want to thank the presenters. I participated as one of the people who's spoken to in the interviews, and everything that I heard said in the meeting I was in was very well represented by these gentlemen. So I almost didn't raise my hand, because what they said was so. But the suggestion I would take from the element that I think was most important to teachers, and as a taxpayer who's one of the people who's been employing this manager of our resources, I think something you can take out of that is when you're looking at interviewing this person and hiring this person, what I'd hear from them is you want to be asking them questions about them as a manager, as someone who has valuable human resources and makes the most of them. Doesn't drive them like a foreman to highest level of productivity, but uses them as professional resources who are consulted as part of the process. What's your philosophy as a manager of human resources? And I would look to you adding a lot of questions about that and concerns about that as you discuss this person. It's a place that could help Fairfield excel even further if we were even better at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Other members wish to come forward, please state your name and address.
Bob Mueller, I'm president of the Fairfield Education Association, the teacher's representative, if you will. And I just wanted to piggyback on what Bob said. You know, as teachers, we think about, you know, kind of our mission as a district, which is to educate children. And that happens when a student and a teacher are sitting down with each other, and ideally magic happens and advancement takes place. And someone who is really great in this job is going to be able to focus on that interaction and make sure that both parties are operating at their best when that's taking place. And that takes skill in management. You know, how do you interrelate with your teachers so they feel respected and valued? And so when they're in this classroom with the kids, they're feeling, you know, really great about, you know, how the district is doing. They're feeling very supported. Student-wise, there's a whole bunch of things that go into supporting the students so they're ready to learn and want to engage. And so I think, I would hope that when we think about who we want as a superintendent, the financial piece is great, but we need to focus in on that interaction. I call it the moment of truth, that moment of truth when students and teachers are with each other and our mission is being carried out. The other thing I wanted to mention, and I'm glad you put it on the slide, was deciding when to continue initiatives and when to get rid of initiatives. Time is probably among our most precious resources. It may be even more than money in the district. We just don't have enough time to do all that needs to be done. And we need to be respectful of time and how it's being deployed to the best use possible. And so, I hope that we would find somebody that values time, will discontinue things or has a process for discontinuing things that aren't providing the cost benefit to the district that, might necessarily be there. And also who values training, because if you do decide that you're going to follow through on an initiative, the training and the professional development needs to be there so that you can get the most out of the initiative that you're executing. So these are characteristics, maybe more specific, and I think they were embodied in your material, but just to be more specific, I think someone who values training, someone with the people management skills, you're spending $100 million or more on human resources, we might as well get the best out of those resources rather than the worst. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Other members of the public, please come forward, state your name and address.
Good evening. My name is Joan Robb, 131 Nonapog. I'm a town resident. 4 children have gone through the Fairfield Public Schools. I'm also a 3rd grade teacher here in town. And I was really pleased to see that data was at the bottom of what we value, although it doesn't feel like that most of the time. For us, and I think I speak for all teachers, but certainly for the elementary population, that our students are more than a data point, a cohort, an SBA score, a COGAT score, a Naglieri score, an I-ready score, and STAR score, and that's just a small part of the assessment that we do, which we seem like we're doing more of that than anything else in our classrooms these days. Our students are people, they are children, our constituents are children. They are talented and creative and bright, and they have quirks and challenges. And as Bob said, time is our greatest resource and seems to be sometimes the least respected. It's more important than any textbook that you choose, any smart board. It's our time with our students, and that they are children. And that, I think, needs to be at the forefront of what is valued by a superintendent that we bring. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody else wish to come forward and make a comment? Please do so. State your name and address.
My name is Frank Sahagian. I'm also a town resident for more than over 30 years and a teacher over at Woods as well, and I think you guys did a great job in capturing exactly what we need. And I would just also add, Dr. Teitel had some magic in knowing what was going on in the classroom, even though he didn't often visit them. So underlying there, he knew exactly what was going on in our classrooms. He was an instructional leader, and I'm glad to see that you had that up there as somebody who comes up through education and his collaborative. There is the need for somebody who's very collaborative. I'd also just like to address really the board in terms of the process that you might be using. I'm a teacher only for 6 years. I came from a business background and as an executive in a public corporation and hiring a lot of people. And that's probably, as you said, one of the most important things you do is the hiring, selecting the right person to lead an organization. And whenever I did it as a senior manager, I always got my stakeholders involved. And I don't know what the process that you folks are planning on doing in terms of in this interviewing process, but I think it would be really important to get the stakeholders involved in the interview process, that the person that when you finalize, get down there, have administrators talk to them. Find out, as you said before, about demonstrating these things. The way you know is by talking to the people who live with us every day and seeing what type of people they hire. Talk to the people who they've hired in the past. Not the people that they've hired, but the people that work for them and what it was like to work for them. So I would just encourage you as a board in the process to hopefully this is not an insular thing just within the board, but to consider the stakeholders as well in this process. Thank you.
Thank you. Other members of the public wish to come forward and state your name and address? Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Dr. Henry Yoon. I'm at 280 Riders Lane. In addition to being a resident here in Fairfield with and a parent, I also happen to be the medical director for the City of Stamford, as well as the medical advisor for Stamford Public Schools. And I would the only comment I wanted to make was to please keep in mind that as you well know, our children are in schools for a large portion of the day and have a tremendous amount of events and activities, and they are a captive audience. So please keep in mind to try to include an element of a superintendent who values wellness. I think it's a very important trait, part of the education, just part of the many elements of education that they should keep in mind in terms of wellness, not only in physical wellness, but in mental health. We talked a little bit about the fact that there are stressors involved, whether it's going to college or other stressors, just being an adolescent or a child. Growing up can be a tremendous stress in and of itself. So in addition to all those other elements that I think are very, very important, I would just encourage the board and also the search firm to please try to keep that in mind as well. Someone who values wellness in children, and in particular mental health issues as well. Thank you.
And you have been or still are perhaps a member of our Board of Health?
Yes, I am.
Yes.
On Board of Health. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Other members of the public that wish to come forward and make a comment? I said it wouldn't be a dialogue, but I'll ask our two consultants. I'll ask our two consultants from HYA whether there was anything that they heard that they'd want to respond to, and I'll give you one tip to one of the comments. The board has struggled with the process question that was asked. We want to recruit the best and the brightest candidates for this position, and frequently candidates who have superintendent jobs someplace else are not anxious to be part of a public search process. And so if you want to recruit the best and the brightest, they frequently want that to be held in confidence. And so we've struggled with that, and I don't know whether you have experience in other communities where you'd want to comment on that dynamic, or any other wrap-up comments that you would want to make before we retire.
Well, I'll talk about that dynamic just briefly, because that will be up to the board naturally when you get to that stage of having some finalist candidates. The confidentiality is extremely important for a lot of reasons, and you've already mentioned those. But other boards, when they have gotten to that point where they have two finalists, sometimes three, they will engage other members in that process in a number of ways. Some have used open forums, some don't prefer that. Some prefer meeting with a group of stakeholders representing various groups. That's up to the board. So that's been the broad-based experience. Visitations to other communities where the candidate has served before have not been used as frequently as they had in the past, largely because of that confidentiality issue and largely because boards can find out what they need to know before that. In terms of addressing the one mention of the part of the survey where we asked for suggestions for possible candidates. We review that. We take that seriously. There are some people that didn't, by the way, when they gave their answers. You'd be surprised. But by the same token, we look at everyone on there who may be a viable candidate for the superintendency. We take them seriously. We review it. And we make a decision on whether they would be a suitable candidate based on the overall leadership profile and make appropriate contacts based on that decision.
Okay, thank you. Any final comments from board members? Mr. Llewellyn.
Actually, I have a follow-up on that, please, if I may. Specifically, what % of respondents might have responded with a serious answer to that question? And did you see any repetition in names?
To number 2, yes. And to number 1, it would be significantly lower than the comments from everyone. And I think I can only judge that by the number of pages, which there were only a couple of pages of suggestions, whereas the comments were multitudinous. So I would say of all the respondents, maybe 2 or 3% gave us names,
A couple of dozen.
you know, of recommendations.
Okay, thank you very much.
Any other final comments from board members or from consultants? I'll give you the last word.
No, it's not the last word. The wellness comment struck me because I did hear that a lot. So I'm going to see if I can put that in that final summary report somewhere, because I think that it went beyond college preparation stressors, as the speaker said, and I think there was a lot of talk about watching out for the well-being of the child. So I will fit that into the comments. I think that's very appropriate.
Okay, thank you. Again, thank you for your presentation, for your time in Fairfield, and your continued work on our behalf to find a great next leader. And thank you for the public for coming out. Our item on for the two personnel matters, we will go into executive session. I can never predict how long we'll be in executive session, but hopefully it won't be that long. And so the recommended motion is that we will retire to the library for those of you who wish to stay here and have a place to sit. The recommended motion is that the Board of Education hereby moves into executive session in accordance with Connecticut General Statutes CGS 1-206, 200 parentheses 6, to discuss superintendent employment and the appointment of an interim superintendent. Do I have a motion? Mrs. Gerber, followed by Ms. Carnell. And all in favor, please raise your hand. It is unanimous, 9-0. So we are in executive session. We will move into the library. When we get back, we'll find out how many of you stayed around. Okay, are we ready? So we are out from executive session. We have two personnel matters to act on, and the first one is letter CI. The recommended motion that I will make is that the Board of Education approve the amendments to the Superintendent of Schools employment contract effective July 1, 2016, as discussed in executive session. Do we have a motion that I made? Do we have a second? Mr. Calabrese. This is unusual to the extent that normally we would extend a contract for 12 months. Dr. Title is staying 1 month into the next year, and there are some provisions of his existing contract that don't clarify, although it may be logical, it doesn't clarify that the extra vacation would be 1/12, that the sick time would be 1/12, that the auto allowance would be 1/12. And so our attorneys felt that it would be wise for us to do that, to clarify it through a contract amendment. The second main issue that is in here is that Dr. Title starts Sacred Heart at the end of August. He cannot get on to Sacred Heart's insurance until the beginning of October, and so by agreement he will provide 3.5 days of consulting time to us in return for us keeping him on the health insurance under the same conditions that he is now, the same insurance. We are moving on to the Partnership 2.0, and we presume that he will move on to the Partnership 2.0 as all employees are as of July 1. The 3.5 days are going to be focused on two issues. He will work, as every consultant does, for the interim CEO or the permanent CEO if it may be required. And the first is that the racial imbalance plan that we had hoped to put off till the spring, the State Board of Education wants us to come back in October and November, and we think the interim superintendent would be well served to have somebody who is fully familiar with that issue put the plan together for the state. And second, there's a lot of staff work that starts in August and September and October on the budget, and we want to make sure that the budget gets off on the right foot and that the interim superintendent has some support. He'll, as all part-time people, he's likely to put in more than 3.5 days, so I think he'll more than cover the cost of the health insurance. The 3.5 days relates to the health insurance. And I think those are the main issues that are in this contract. Together with the compensation, we are recommending a 2% raise for him, which brings his base salary to $295,700. He's only going to get 1/12 of that, and the math is actually like
$83.17.
$83.17. So there's not a lot of dollar, but it's in recognition of the work that he did this past year, and specifically the work that he did on the health insurance savings that only came because some people voted to allow that to happen. So we appreciate that. So the motion is in front of us. Any questions from board members? Mr. Llewellyn.
I'd like to propose a couple amendments, please.
Please do.
In paragraph 3D, which reads, paragraph 3D of the contract should be modified such that the superintendent shall receive 1 personal day during the new term. Whenever it is reasonably possible to do so, the superintendent shall give the chairman of the board advance written notice of his intention to take a personal day. I'd like to strike from that the chairman of the, so it says the superintendent shall give the board advance written notice.
Is there a second? Ms. Carnell, do you want to make any comments on it, or it's just self-explanatory?
Stands for itself.
Okay. The only comment I will make is that if the board is interested in knowing what that day is, I will communicate it out to the board. It is normal for the superintendent to communicate to the chairman relative to issues that he is facing or that the board is facing. So I see no reason to not leave in the phrase chairman of the, because the board will be informed anyways. Any other comments on the amendment? No comments on the amendment.
Actually, I do have a comment. Other than during the extenuating circumstances of sickness, I'm not sure if the board ever received a note from you as to personal days. So has Dr. Title taken no personal days based on the comment you just made?
The comment was made based on your desire to know, but no, the board is not normally informed of when he takes a vacation day or a personal day or a sick day. The staff manage that process. Any other questions on the amendment? If not, the amendment is to strike the words in the third line that say chairman of the, so that the sentence would say give the board advance written notice. Everybody understand the amendment that's on in front of you? All in favor of the amendment, please raise your hand. Ms. Lou McCormick, Ms. Carnell, Mrs. Lou McCormick, Ms. Carnell, Mr. Llewellyn, all opposed. Mr. Patton, Mrs. Gerber, Mr. Dwyer, Mr. Calabrese, Ms. Pitko, Mrs. Maxon Kennelly. The motion fails 3-6. Notwithstanding that, I will let you know if he takes a personal day. You have another amendment.
Thank you. I do. Paragraph 3E. The board shall continue to provide the superintendent and members of immediate family with the current level of medical and dental insurance and shall pay the full cost of such coverage until September 30, 2016. I would like to insert a phrase after with the current level of medical and dental insurance to remain parallel with his current contract. So his current
Can you make sure that we know the exact language you want?
Here we go. So his current contracts, we will be inserting after dental insurance. His current contract reads, which shall be the same insurance as that provided for the Fairfield Central Office administrators. And the reason...
Well, let me make sure that the secretary has the wording. The administrators. Do you have it? You want to repeat it so that we know what it is?
So it would be paragraph 3E. The board shall continue to provide the superintendent and the members of his immediate family with his current level of medical and dental insurance, which shall be the same insurance as that provided for the central office administration.
For the Fairfield Central Office administrators, that's fine.
Okay. Is there a second? Mrs. Lou McCormick, do you have comments that you wish to make?
I do. Your comment earlier that you're assuming that Dr. Title and his family will move to the new policy with the district administrators on July 1 is an assumption that we don't have validated. So I just want to make sure that we stay parallel and in conformance and not change the intent of the existing contract, which, if this were not approved, would stand.
Yes, I believe that, that he'll be making the switch because it's the equivalent insurance, which is the word that is often used to describe the insurance that we provide, and we'll be switching to the Partnership 2.0 as of July 1 and not offering the self-insured, so therefore he will switch with everybody else. This contract was reviewed by our board attorney and by Dr. Title's personal attorney, and so I do not advise making changes because I think it's clear of what's going to happen. But on the same token, I will inform the board if that is not the case. Any other comments that you wish? No, Mrs. Lou McCormick made the second. Yes, sorry to point. Do you want to make any comments, Mrs. Lou McCormick?
In the event that it wasn't the case, we would have already approved the contract, and it really would be a moot point. Therefore, I think the clarifying language does make sense to insert, since we're all agreeing that that is the intent.
Anything else, Mr. Llewellyn, that you wish to make a comment on? Any other board member wish to make a comment? Okay. You want to read the amendment as it's in front of us to make sure the board members know what they're voting on?
Amendment to paragraph 3E. The board shall continue to provide the superintendent and the members of his immediate family with his current level of medical and dental insurance, which shall be the same insurance as that provided for the Fairfield Central Office Administration, and shall pay the full cost of such coverage until September 30th, 2016. The board shall retain any subsidy received from the STRB due to its providing this coverage.
Everybody understand the amendment that's in front of us? Okay, all in favor of the amendment, please raise your hand. Mrs. Lou McCormick, Ms. Carnell, Mr. Llewellyn, all opposed, please raise your hand. Mr. Patton, Mrs. Gerber, Mr. Dwyer, Mr. Calabrese, Ms. Pitko, Mrs. Maxon Canelli. The motion fails 3-6. Any other comments or questions? If not, we'll go to the main motion, which is that the Board of Education approve the amendment. Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Carnell.
Just a clarification, if I may. I believe the way the contract reads, and in terms of the benefits we're extending to Dr. Title, he's expected, if needed, to work 3.5 days, if I understand.
Yep.
But I believe you also said, if I understand, if he goes past the 3.5 days, then he can charge us a consulting fee. Is that correct?
Correct. We have agreed in advance that should the new superintendent, for any reason, feel that they really need Dr. Title to address a specific issue, that he would be paid at his current daily rate, so that there was no confusion over what that would be. That really would be at the discretion of the new superintendent, whether they really felt that they needed him, but we think the 3.5 days will cover the 2 assignments that we're talking about.
Thank you.
If no further questions, Mr. Llewellyn?
In terms of the compensation and the 2% raise, does that, because that becomes his new salary, how does that calculate, or do you know specifically how that calculates into retirement benefits? Does it move on into perpetuity?
I do not know how the retirement benefits, the State Teachers Retirement Board, are calculated. This brings him an extra $83.17. I am sure that has some impact in perpetuity, but I do not know the math.
But I guess my concern is if it's almost $6,000 a year and that's his new salary, are we now costing the state taxpayers an incremental percent of that $6,000? I don't know if we have confirmation of that. So I guess what I'd like to actually do is propose that rather than giving a $483 increase, I'd rather turn that into a bonus so that we avoid that ambiguity and it gets Dr. Title the same recognition in terms of what he's accomplished, and that same $483, and alleviates us of any potential ambiguity. And I don't know the answer.
You're arguing, do you want to put that in the form of a motion or not?
I'd like to see what other folks have to say first.
Okay. At the risk of having some people get mad at me, I believe that will result in the same 6-3 vote. If you're asking for response, so that would be my response.
So if that, no one really has been able to answer the question whether or not that incremental $6,000 times whatever the multiplier is for retirement goes into perpetuity or not. So if the intent is another $483, I would think that the board should be indifferent, but actually being more conservative would be to give that $483 as a bonus rather than take the risk that it's $6,000 into perpetuity.
Again, are you going to make a motion or are you arguing?
Sure, I'll make that motion.
So please make a motion so that we can...
Salary of the superintendent for the new term shall be, and I guess we'll insert that same number that's down below, $289,902, which shall be paid in cash, less any applicable tax, other withholdings, in accordance with the boards, and we'll keep it that way. And we can add a new sentence, a one-time bonus in the amount of $483.17 shall be paid on July 31st.
Is there a second for that? Mrs. Lou McCormick. Any further conversation you want on that subject? Mrs. Lou McCormick? No? Okay. You want to read the additional language that is added, I assume, after the word payroll periods?
A one-time bonus of $483.17 shall be paid July 31st.
And of course, the blank is the $289,902. Board members understand the amendment that's in front of us? All in favor of the amendment, please raise your hand. Mrs. Lou McCormick, Ms. Carnell, Mr. Llewellyn, all opposed. Mr. Patton, Mrs. Gerber, Mr. Dwyer, Mr. Calabrese, Ms. Pitko, Mrs. Maxon Connelly. Back to the main motion. That the Board of Education approve the amendments to the Superintendent of Schools employment contract effective July 1, 2016, as discussed in executive session. All in favor, please raise your hand. Mr. Patton, Mrs. Gerber, Mr. Dwyer, Mr. Calabrese, Ms. Pitko, Mrs. Maxon Connelly, all opposed. Mrs. Lou McCormick, Ms. Carnell, Mr. Llewellyn, the motion passes 6-3. Thank you very much. The second thing is I want to compliment both the board, but especially Mrs. Gerber, who managed the process of calling through a whole bunch of people. And so let me put the recommended motion on the table and ask Mrs. Gerber to move it, and then she can talk about the process, if you will. The recommended motion is that the Board of Education approve the interim superintendent of schools employment contract effective August 1, 2016, as discussed in executive session, and specifically naming Dr. Stephen Tracy as the interim superintendent. So that's the motion. Mrs. Gerber, second. Mrs. Maxon Connelly beat you. Mrs. Gerber, do you have any comments that you wish to make on Dr. Tracy's appointment?
No, just as the board has met with Dr. Tracy, and I think that he would be a very good interim that would help the district, to kind of steer the boat in the right direction.
Mrs. Maxon Connelly.
I just reiterate what Mrs. Gerber says. I think it was a very exciting interview, a lot of energy, understood the role well, and I look forward to having him join our district.
We interviewed 3 people based on looking at their resumes and whatnot. We had good candidates, and when we looked at Dr. Tracy's experience, we thought that would be good for the district. We did reach an agreement that would allow him to serve in that role through June 17 in the event that we did not find somebody that we wanted to hire immediately. And that would allow for continuity so that we wouldn't have to violate the state's 45% rule relative to interim superintendent's compensation and perhaps have to move to another interim to get us through the end of the school year. So Dr. Tracy was both our first choice and I think has reached an agreement that will work well. I have to get my signature and Dr. Tracy's signature on the contract, and so probably in a day or two, the contract will be public knowledge. Any other comments from board members? Okay, so the motion is that the Board of Education approve the interim superintendent of schools employment contract effective August 1, 2016, as discussed in executive session, naming Dr. Stephen Tracy to that role. Everybody understand the motion? All in favor, please raise your hand. It is unanimous. Thank you very much for that unanimous vote. Dr. Tracy will appreciate that. So now we need a motion to adjourn. Mrs. Gerber, followed by Ms. Carnell. Can I put everybody's hand up so I know it's a unanimous motion to adjourn, Mr. Patton? Thank you. It's unanimous. Thank you for staying.